The wind learned his name before anyone else did. It called to him through the ribs of a broken roof, carrying the smell of snow and old smoke, as if the sky itself remembered the warmth he couldn't. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. Our dream is to reach 1,000 hearts. He stood at the edge of the clearing, a small figure wrapped in a coat too thin for the season, breath drifting like prayer. The shelter crouched before him, half collapsed and silvered with frost, its boards buckled like tired shoulders. The world around was quiet in the way of places that have seen too much. A fence leaned. A birch tree, peeled raw by wind, lifted white fingers toward a dim afternoon sun. Somewhere, far off, a raven turned once in the sky, a stitch of black thread pulled through gray cloth. He didn't speak. He had learned that words could vanish into the cold, the way footprints vanished under new snow. But he felt the house watching him, the way an empty chapel watches the last believer who enters after the candles have burned to stubs. He touched the door with mittenless fingers, feeling the splinters. Wood gave off the faint scent of rain long gone. He pushed, and the door opened with a sigh like someone remembering. Inside, the air had its own weather. Colder in the corners, softer near the center where a ring of stones marked an old fire. The roof was torn above the hearth, a dark mouth through which a pale sky peered down. A length of copper wire trembled overhead like a thin, silent bell. He took a careful step. The floor complained. Dust rose and settled back, as if choosing not to be disturbed. He was hungry, but he did not look for food first. He looked for belonging. His mother had taught him that survival starts with order. Stack the wood, sweep the floor, find the light. He remembered her voice, not the shape of her face. Memory was like a lantern wrapped in cloth, its flame casting a circle just big enough to stand inside without fear. He bent, gathered a few fallen twigs that the wind had kindly delivered through the hole in the roof, and arranged them in the stone ring with reverence, as if placing bones where they were meant to rest. In one corner, he found a cracked porcelain cup, white with a thin blue rim, the kind that warms a hand and carries a life of mornings inside it. He rinsed it with snow and set it upright on the windowsill, dead ivy brushing the glass like a shy curtain. On a tilted shelf, a fragment of a book, brittle but legible. The curl of letters, a half verse, light shines in the darkness. He pressed the page against his chest, feeling its dry coolness through wool. The house didn't answer, not with voices. It answered with the invisible grammar of places, a square of floor that had been walked smooth, a nail bent sideways from hurried hands, a scuff near the door where boots had paused in doubt. He read the room like a child reads the weather, with his skin. He lifted a plank where the boards gapped, listening to the tiny cry of nail against wood, and discovered nothing but a draft that tasted of pine. Still, the attempt mattered. Trying was a way to tell the world you were here. He opened his pack, a crust of bread wrapped in cloth, a stub of candle, 2 matches in a tin. He snapped one match and it died against the damp air, a brief orange blossom vanishing. He waited, counting in his head the way his mother taught him to count sheep when nights were long, by naming the things he still had. Coat, candle, bread, name. The second match caught, blossom widening, a small sunrise cupped in his hands. He lit the candle and set it on the stone ring where a fire once lived. It made a tiny cathedral of light around his knees, throwing shadows onto the wall that looked like procession and choir. Outside, the wind combed the birches and brought with it the scent of iron that comes before deeper snow. He pulled the door closed and leaned a plank across it, not to keep anything out, but to hold what little he had inside. He whispered, "Thank you," not sure to whom. Maybe to the house for still standing. Maybe to the match for being brave. Maybe to the part of himself that hadn't run from the first groan of the floorboards. He began to work, not because he thought he could fix everything, but because moving his hands made the cold less personal. He gathered fallen lath. He pushed aside a broken chair. Its woven seat collapsed like a forgotten net. He found a child's wooden horse with one wheel missing, and for a moment the world stilled. He pictured a small palm pushing it across the same floor, laughter ringing, the horse taking careful, squeaking steps toward a table that no longer existed. He placed the toy on the shelf beside the cup, careful to face it toward the door. Let it wait, the way all faithful things wait. He lifted his hood to catch the drift sifting from the hole in the roof. Snow is quiet, but each flake carries news. Sky speaking to earth in a language of falling light. He didn't hate the snow. It had hidden him when he needed hiding. It had given him water when the stream ran mean. The cold, though, the cold was a judge. It measured your will by how still you could hold it. As daylight thinned, the candle trembled but held. He took the crust of bread, softened it with melted snow, and ate half, saving the rest because hope always keeps a small piece for tomorrow. He closed his eyes and mouthed the half-verse he'd found, finishing it the way his mother once had, and the darkness has not overcome it. The words did not warm his hands, but they steadied his breathing, and sometimes that is the first miracle. He lay down near the hearth, his back to the stones, coat pulled to his chin, the wooden horse keeping watch from its shelf. Through the torn roof, a single star appeared, quiet and stubborn. A draft stroked his hair like a rough blessing. The house creaked once, a tired old ship on a black sea, then settled. He listened until the wind became a lullaby stitched from birch leaves and far ravens, and he thought, not for the first time, that maybe places have souls the way people do, and that loneliness can be shared by both. Before sleep took him, he reached toward the candle and whispered, "If I stay, will you keep me?" The flame lifted and bowed, a nod from a small king. He smiled without meaning to. In the morning he would gather boards, test the nails, find a way to teach the roof to believe in itself again. But for now, his last waking thought was a child's simple creed. A house with no name can still learn to answer when called. When he woke, the world had turned to glass. The air itself seemed frozen, each breath leaving a cloud that hung in front of him like a ghost too tired to move on. The candle beside him had melted into a pool of wax shaped like a small white flower. It had burned itself out sometime in the night, but its faint smoke still curled upward, thin and blue, like a prayer that hadn't found its way home yet. The boy rose slowly, pulling the coat tighter around his shoulders. Every motion made the air whisper, the sound of fabric against frost. His fingers were stiff, their skin cracked where warmth had once lived. He pressed them together, blew into them, and waited until a tremor of feeling returned. Beyond the cracked window, dawn bled through the gray, revealing a world softened under a new blanket of snow. The birch trees bowed under its weight. The fence posts looked like crosses marking a forgotten field. He stepped outside, his boots sinking deep into the untouched powder. The cold bit like hunger. The silence was complete, not an absence of sound, but a presence of stillness. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move, as if it too were holding its breath. The boy tilted his face upward and let the snow kiss his skin. It stung at first, then melted against the warmth of his cheek, leaving tiny rivers that froze again before they could fall. He needed wood. Fire was not just warmth, it was proof of life. Without it, the house would fade back into ruin, and he would fade with it. He trudged toward the edge of the forest where the trees grew close enough to block the wind. Each step crunched like breaking glass. The smell of pine grew stronger the deeper he went, mingling with the faint, sweet scent of decay. Fallen branches, old bark, and something almost like memory. A bird startled from a branch above him. A small thing, brown and fast, vanishing into the white distance. For a heartbeat, his chest lifted with something like hope. If a bird could survive this winter, so could he. He gathered fallen limbs, stacking them in his arms until the load pressed against his chin. The smallest branch still wore its needles, green against the white, stubborn as faith. When he turned back toward the house, his footprints trailed behind him like a story being written by someone who didn't yet know the ending. The shelter looked different in daylight. Less a ruin, more a promise. Snow clung to its roof, hiding the broken places. Smoke stains above the hearth told of warmth that once filled the space. He could almost imagine the family who had lived there. A man chopping wood, a woman humming over a pot, a child running barefoot across the floor. He paused at the door and bowed his head slightly, as though entering a church. Inside, he built the fire carefully, small, patient. Sparks jumped like startled insects, then caught and grew, licking the stones with orange tongues. Heat began to rise, shy but steady. He stretched his hands toward it and felt life return in slow waves. The flame painted his face with trembling light, revealing the softness that hunger and cold had not yet taken from him. In a corner, snowmelt dripped through the hole in the roof, one drop at a time, rhythmic as a clock. He set a metal bowl beneath it. The sound was comforting, a steady reminder that the world still moved, even when it seemed frozen. He tore a piece from his remaining bread and dipped it in the water, pretending it was soup. Then he began to explore the rest of the shelter, a small room with a collapsed cot, a cracked window, and what looked like an old stove, rusted shut. Against the far wall, a torn blanket hung like a curtain, shielding what might have been another doorway. He hesitated. Behind it, the air was colder, heavier. Still, he lifted the blanket aside. A storage nook, or maybe a pantry once. Shelves leaned at odd angles, their boards furred with dust. But in the corner, half buried beneath old sacks, something caught the light. He knelt and brushed the snow away. A tin cup. And beside it, a handful of nails, neatly tied with string, as though left for whoever might need them. He smiled, a small, uneven thing that felt foreign on his face. Someone long ago had believed in repair. He carried the nails to the hearth and laid them beside the fire to warm. Each small act, gathering, fixing, building, felt like speaking a word of faith without sound. His mother had said that prayer didn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it could be done with hands. He began to patch the gaps in the wall with old boards, pressing them tight, hammering softly with a rock. The rhythm filled the house. Tap, 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 the sound of stubborn hope. Outside, snow thickened again, falling in slow, graceful sheets. The world was rebuilding itself in silence, and he was doing the same. By afternoon, he had sealed the largest cracks. Wind still hissed through the roof, but it was gentler now, like a voice whispering instead of shouting. He fed the fire one more branch and sat beside it, his eyes half closed. The flames made the shadows dance. The wooden horse on the shelf seemed to nod in approval. He spoke aloud then to the empty room. If I fix this place, maybe it will keep me. Maybe that's the deal. His voice trembled, but not from fear. It was the sound of someone learning again how to belong. The house answered with a pop from the fire, a burst of sparks rising like stars. He leaned back, feeling the warmth soak into his bones, and thought of his mother's lullabies. They always began the same way. The morning after snow is when God listens best. Outside, the storm deepened, but inside, light flickered against the walls. Fragile, brave, alive. The storm passed in the night, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the earth was holding its breath. Morning arrived pale and shy, spreading a soft blue light through the cracks in the roof. The fire had long since died, but a faint warmth still lingered in the stones, the kind that stays not in the air, but in the memory of air. The boy sat up slowly. His back ached from the uneven floor, and his breath smoked in small clouds that rose and vanished against the ceiling. For a moment, he simply listened, to the creak of the walls, the drip of melting snow, the whisper of wind curling around the eaves. The shelter was speaking again, but this time its voice was softer, more familiar. He rose, brushing frost from his coat, and looked around. The candle's melted remains glistened like amber on the stones. The wooden horse waited patiently on its shelf beside the cracked cup. Together, they seemed like old friends who refused to leave even when the music stopped. He began to tidy the space, sweeping with a bundle of twigs, stacking the scraps of wood by size, folding the torn blanket he'd used as cover. There was peace in the work, as if each motion mended something invisible. When his hands grew numb, he breathed on them and pressed them to the stones, whispering, "Still here. Still here." In the far corner, near the broken stove, something caught his eye, a faint glimmer beneath a layer of dust. He knelt, brushing the grime aside. It was a fragment of glass, curved and faintly colored, perhaps from an old windowpane or a bottle. When he held it up to the light, it turned the morning into a piece of stained sky, tinting the world with quiet hope. He placed it in the cracked cup, beside a tiny pine cone he had found near the door. Little by little, he was building an altar without meaning to, a collection of things that still believed in beauty. He found more traces as the day unfolded, a small iron key near the hearth, a burnt page half hidden under a board, a child's mitten turned to leather with age. The page was from a Bible. He could still make out the words, though the fire had eaten their edges. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. He read it twice, lips moving silently, and then folded it carefully, pressing it to his chest as if the warmth of his heart might keep the words alive. By midday, the light changed, sharper, golden. Snow outside sparkled like a field of crushed glass. He stood by the window, his breath fogging the pane, and traced a small cross in the frost. For a long time, he watched the shape fade, then return as the cold reclaimed it. There was something sacred about the way things disappeared and came back, as if the world were practicing resurrection one breath at a time. He turned and looked around the room again. It no longer felt like someone else's ruin. It felt borrowed, and that was enough. He began speaking softly, as if to the walls themselves. "Whoever you were," he said, "thank you for leaving this behind. I'll keep it warm for you." His voice echoed slightly, bouncing from the timbers and returning quieter, humbled. Then, without deciding to, he began to hum. The melody came unbidden, slow and trembling. One his mother used to sing while stirring soup or patching a torn sleeve. It was a lullaby, though he couldn't remember the words. The sound filled the shelter, curling into every shadow until it seemed as if the house itself remembered the tune. The boards creaked in rhythm. The glass shard caught the light and shimmered faintly, as though the air had learned to listen. He stopped only when his throat ached. For a long moment he sat beside the fire pit, eyes half closed, hands resting on his knees. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with presence, the kind that made him wonder if someone somewhere was humming back. A gust of wind pressed against the door, then faded. The boy turned, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was only the snow outside, bright and untouched. Still, he smiled. "You can come in," he said quietly. "It's warmer now." That night, he lit another candle, the last one he had. Its glow was small but steady. He placed it beside the cup and the glass fragment, watching the flame refract into colors across the wall. He spoke aloud to the empty air, his voice calm and certain. "My mother said a home is where prayers learn to stay. Maybe that's what I'm doing, teaching them not to leave." Outside, a wolf howled far off in the hills. The sound rose and fell like grief turning into song. The boy didn't flinch. He listened, nodding once, then whispered, "Yes, I hear you." And when he lay down to sleep, the candle still burned, a single, unwavering heart inside a house that was no longer nameless. By morning, the world was quieter than ever. The kind of silence that feels too deep to disturb. The boy opened his eyes to the soft sound of snow slipping from the roof. Light came in silver ribbons through the cracks, cutting across the floor like slow-moving water. For a moment, he lay still, listening to his own heartbeat. It was steady now, stronger than when he'd first come. When he pushed the door open, a wave of cold rolled in, sharp and bright as glass. The wind had shifted overnight, and the drifts had climbed halfway up the doorway. He pulled his coat tighter and stepped out, sinking to his knees in the snow. The air smelled of pine and something faintly metallic, the scent of frozen streams beneath the surface. He trudged toward the birch grove to gather more wood. The trees whispered faintly as he passed, their white trunks like sentinels watching over him. The weight of the snow muffled his steps, making him feel as though he was walking inside a dream. That was when he heard it, a sound too soft to belong to the wind. A whimper, faint, fragile, the kind of sound the heart notices before the ears do. He froze. The sound came again, closer this time. He turned slowly, scanning the white horizon. And there, half buried near a fallen branch, was a shape that didn't belong to the snow. Small, gray, trembling. The boy waded closer, breath quickening. It was a dog, thin to the bone, its fur clumped with ice, ribs showing through its sides like the ribs of a shipwreck. Its eyes were open but dull, clouded with exhaustion. When the boy knelt beside it, the creature let out a low growl, not of anger but of fear. "It's all right," he whispered, his voice shaking in the cold. "I won't hurt you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last piece of bread he'd been saving. He broke it in half and placed a small piece on the snow, close enough for the dog to smell. The animal sniffed, hesitated, then took a single step forward. The boy didn't move. He knew trust was a fragile bridge, and once broken, it takes forever to rebuild. Minutes passed. The dog ate the bread, then looked up, its eyes clearer now, almost questioning. The boy smiled faintly. "You're not the only one who's lost," he said. "Maybe we can stay lost together." He lifted the animal gently, wrapping it in his coat. It was lighter than he expected, all bones and heartbeat. As he carried it back to the shelter, he could feel its trembling, not just from cold, but from fear and weariness too familiar. He whispered softly with each step as if words could keep it alive. "Almost there. Just a little more." Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath as he laid the dog near the fire pit. He added the last of the wood and struck a match. The flames took quickly, spreading orange light over both of them. The dog lifted its head, eyes flickering in the firelight, and for the first time wagged its tail. Just once, weakly, but enough to make the boy laugh aloud. It was the first sound of joy that had touched those walls in years. He found an old tin bowl, filled it with melted snow, and set it beside the fire. The dog drank slowly, each sip a small resurrection. When it finished, it curled beside the hearth, pressing its nose into its tail. The boy watched, his hands clasped between his knees. He could feel the warmth returning, not just in the room, but in himself. He decided to name the dog Ash, for the soft gray of its fur and the way it had risen from the cold like something saved from a dying fire. "Ash," he said aloud, testing the word. The dog lifted its head, as if recognizing the sound as its own. As daylight faded, the boy shared what little food he had left. Half for him, half for the dog. They ate in silence, broken only by the sound of snow tapping against the roof. Every so often, the dog's eyes met his, and in that gaze there was no fear, only a quiet understanding that both of them had been carried here by something greater than luck. When night came, the wind rose again, moaning through the trees. The boy lay close to the dog, feeling its warmth seep into his side. Outside, the snow thickened, covering the footprints that led to the door. Inside, 2 steady breaths filled the darkness, sinking until they sounded like one. He thought of his mother then, her stories about angels traveling in disguise, never revealing themselves until you had shown kindness first. He smiled at the thought and whispered into the dark, "So this is what you meant." Ash shifted, pressing closer, sighing in his sleep. The boy reached out and rested his hand gently on the dog's back. "You're safe now," he murmured. "We both are." The fire flickered low, shadows dancing on the walls like moving wings. The candlelight turned the ruined shelter golden, and for the first time it truly felt like home. And somewhere outside, under the heavy sky, the wind carried away the loneliness that had haunted the boy since the beginning. It drifted out into the white, where it would trouble him no more. Morning came wrapped in silver. The snow outside was so bright it looked like the world had been rebuilt out of light itself. Inside the shelter, the air was still and warm, carrying the soft rhythm of 2 living hearts, one boy, one dog. Ash stirred first, stretching slowly, paws scraping the floor, then curling again with a soft sigh. The boy opened his eyes, smiling faintly. It had been a long time since he had woken to the sound of something alive beside him. He rose quietly, careful not to wake the dog, and pushed the door open just enough to let in the morning air. The sky was washed clean, the kind of blue that only comes after a storm has confessed everything. Smoke rose faintly from the hearth, and his breath joined it, both drifting upward like unspoken thanks. He stepped outside. The birches shimmered in the sun, their branches glittering with frost. The whole forest looked like it had been carved from glass. And yet, beneath that beauty, he knew the truth. This world could still break easily. He'd seen it before, in villages turned to ash, in faces that vanished behind smoke. But here, in this small circle of stillness, something was being repaired, even if only thread by thread. When he returned to the house, Ash was awake, watching him with calm amber eyes. The dog wagged his tail once, then again, as if to remind him that joy was still possible. "Good morning," the boy whispered, kneeling beside him. He scratched behind Ash's ears. The dog leaned into his hand, breathing softly. The fire was nearly out. He stirred the embers, coaxing them back to life with dry bark. As the flames grew, light spilled into the corners of the room, touching the wooden horse, the cracked cup, the shard of colored glass he'd placed on the shelf. When the sunlight hit that glass, it painted the wall with a thin ribbon of blue. The boy stared at it for a long moment, his breath catching. Then he saw something else, a loose board near the hearth, slightly darker than the rest, as if touched by old smoke. He tapped it with his boot. It shifted. Beneath it, the faintest glimmer, a whisper of metal-reflecting firelight. He knelt, heart quickening. Ash lifted his head, ears twitching. The boy pried the board free. Dust rose in a soft sigh. Beneath it lay a small wooden box, its edges blackened by age but still intact. It was tied shut with a strip of faded linen. For a moment, he just stared at it, afraid to disturb whatever memory it held. He brushed the dust away with his sleeve, untied the cloth, and lifted the lid. Inside was a small oil lamp, brass, tarnished but beautiful, and beside it a folded piece of paper sealed with wax. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. The handwriting was delicate, almost careful. To the one who finds this shelter, this place once held laughter, prayers, and the smell of bread. When war came, we fled, but left behind our light. It was meant to guide whoever might come after. If you are reading this, you are not alone. Keep the lamp burning, and you will never be without hope. Miriam and Elias, he read the words twice, 3 times, each one sinking deeper until his eyes blurred. For a long time, he couldn't move. The world outside had gone quiet again, as if it too was reading. Ash nudged his arm gently, and the boy smiled through tears. "We're not alone," he whispered. "They left this for us." He lifted the lamp, brushing away the dust. The metal was cold but solid. When he tilted it, he could still hear a faint slosh of oil inside, as though it had been waiting all these years just for this moment. He struck a match. The flame leapt up, catching the wick, flaring bright, then softening into a steady golden glow. The room transformed. Shadows retreated. The light reached into every corner, touching the walls like the hand of something sacred. The wooden horse gleamed. The shard of glass threw blue across the ceiling. Even the air seemed to breathe again. The boy knelt and whispered, "Thank you," his voice trembling with reverence. He turned to Ash, who was watching the flame intently, ears perked. "This light," he said softly, "we'll keep it alive. For them. For us." He set the lamp on the stone ring where the old fire had burned and sat beside it, letting the warmth fill his chest. The words from the letter echoed inside him. "You are not alone." And for the first time since his mother's voice faded into the wind, he believed it. He reached for the Bible page he had kept folded in his pocket. Opening it beside the lamp, he traced the words with one finger. The edges were frayed, but the verse still stood clear. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." He smiled. "You see, Ash," he said quietly, "they left us a promise, and now it's ours to keep." The lamp's flame flickered as if nodding. Outside, the snow began to fall again, but this time it didn't feel cruel. It looked almost gentle, as if the sky were blessing the earth in small white prayers. The boy watched the light dance on the walls, his heart steady. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe, and tell us where you're listening from. Our dream is to reach 1,000 hearts who believe in hope, just like this. The shelter no longer felt broken. It felt alive. The lamp burned all through the night. Its glow was steady, soft, golden, unafraid. Outside, the snow kept falling, and the world went on being cold. But inside the shelter, warmth lived again. It hummed in the wood, it breathed through the boy's hands, and it curled in the quiet rise and fall of Ash's chest as he slept beside the hearth. When morning came, the boy didn't wake to silence anymore. He woke to small sounds, the soft scrape of paws, the whisper of snow sliding from the roof, the creak of timber stretching under new light. The house was alive, and it was speaking in its own slow language. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and looked at the lamp. The flame had shrunk but not died. Its glow touched every corner of the room, catching on the little things he had gathered, the cup, the glass shard, the wooden horse. The house no longer looked abandoned. It looked lived in. "Morning, Ash," he said softly. The dog wagged its tail, blinking at him from the warm circle of light. He opened the door. The air that rushed in was crisp but not cruel. The storm had passed, leaving the world bright and clean. The birch trees stood tall again, and the snow sparkled as if dusted with stars. For a moment, he simply breathed, feeling sunlight on his face. He knew he couldn't live on hope alone. The bread was gone. But the villagers, those distant shapes he'd seen once moving across the valley, might still be out there. People who feared strangers, perhaps, but people nonetheless. His mother had said, "When you build light, someone will always find it." So he began his work. He fixed the door first, wedging a branch across the frame and sealing the cracks with cloth torn from an old blanket. Then he patched the roof, one plank at a time, until the open wound of the sky became a scar instead. Every nail he hammered, every splinter he sanded, was an act of belief. Ash followed him everywhere, tail sweeping the dust, watching each movement as if understanding. Sometimes the boy spoke to him as he worked. "This board used to be a wall," he said. "Now it's a roof. Sometimes we change places and don't even notice." By midday, smoke rose from the chimney again. Thin, straight, proud. From the hill, anyone passing could see it, a column of warmth against the white. And somewhere someone did see. The boy noticed it first, footprints near the edge of the woods that weren't his own. They appeared one morning, faint but deliberate, stopping near the fence, then turning back toward the trees. The first day, he said nothing. The second, he left half a bowl of soup on the doorstep. The third, he found the bowl empty, and in its place, a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. He stared at it for a long time, hardly breathing. Ash sniffed it, tail wagging. The boy smiled slowly. "See," he whispered, "the world isn't as empty as it looks." Each day after that, the exchange continued. He left food, they left something in return. Sometimes an apple, sometimes a few nails, once even a thick wool blanket. No one came to the door. No voices called. But the message was clear enough. "We see your light." By evening, the boy lit the lamp again and placed it by the window. It shone like a tiny star, trembling but unwavering. The flame reflected in his eyes as he whispered a prayer he half remembered from his mother's lips. "Let this house keep its warmth. Let its doors never close to those who are cold." He began to decorate the walls with charcoal he found near the hearth, drawing the things he missed, the things he hoped for. Mountains. A sun that never set. A woman's face half lost in shadow. A small child holding a bird. Ash sat beside him, head tilted as if admiring the work. The shelter slowly changed. The cracked wood softened under his touch, the once empty corners filled with quiet meaning. Even the air smelled different. Smoke, pine, melted snow, and something faintly sweet, the scent of renewal. One night, he woke to the sound of footsteps outside. He froze. The door creaked. Then, slowly, a shadow moved past the window. A small figure, perhaps a villager, leaving something at the threshold. The boy didn't move until the steps faded away into the wind. When he finally opened the door, a bundle lay in the snow, a loaf of bread, a piece of smoked meat, and a folded scrap of paper. He carried it inside, heart pounding. Ash wagged his tail anxiously. The boy unwrapped the bundle, read the note. The handwriting was rough but kind. "We see your light at night. Keep it burning. The valley still needs it." He pressed the note to his chest, eyes closing. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then he smiled through tears. He turned to Ash. "They see us," he said. "They really do." The dog barked once, tail thumping the floor. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the lamp, watching the flame. It no longer looked fragile. It looked eternal, the kind of light that doesn't ask for permission to stay. He realized then that the shelter was no longer a refuge just for him. It had become something greater, a place where strangers found courage, where kindness passed quietly from one heart to another. And in that moment, under the flickering lamp, the boy whispered to the night, "I think it's a home now." Outside, snow fell in soft applause. Years passed, though the boy never counted them. Time flowed differently in the valley. slower, gentler, as if the wind itself had learned to walk softly around the house. Seasons came and went like visitors, leaving their gifts. Spring's thawed streams, summer's wild berries, autumn's gold leaves, and winter's quiet mercy. The house had changed too. Its walls, once broken and gray, now stood firm beneath the mountain shadow. Smoke rose faithfully each morning, a soft column of proof that life still bloomed in the ruins. The wooden horse remained on its shelf, the blue shard of glass still caught the light each dawn, and the brass lamp, the heart of the home, burned every night without fail. And the boy, now grown, still tended the flame. His hair had darkened, his hands had calloused, but his eyes, those same eyes that once searched the snow for kindness, still carried the reflection of that first trembling light. Ash was old now, his muzzle white with years, his movements slower but no less faithful. He followed the man everywhere, padding beside him through the fields and the pines, his tail wagging with the steady rhythm of an old song. Sometimes travelers came. Refugees. Wanderers. The lost. They found the house the same way he once had, by following the smoke. Some stayed a night, some a week, some only long enough to warm their hands and whisper a thank you before returning to the road. Each one left a piece of themselves behind. A word, a tear, a prayer written on a scrap of cloth and tied to the birch outside the door. The man never asked where they came from. He only offered warmth, bread, and silence. The three things he knew could heal. When asked why he kept the lamp burning, he always gave the same answer. Because someone once did the same for me. Each night, as the valley fell into its quiet sleep, he would sit beside the hearth, the old Bible page still pressed between his palms. Its edges had yellowed, but the words were still clear. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. He'd look at Ash sleeping by the fire, at the lamp glowing steady beside the window, and he'd smile, not with pride, but with peace. Then he'd pray. Not for himself. Not anymore. He prayed for those still wandering. For the children walking roads that seemed endless. For mothers who carried hope in their hands when they had no bread to carry. For homes that no longer stood but could still be rebuilt from memory. His voice would be barely more than a whisper, rough, quiet, almost like wind slipping between boards. Lord, let the lost find their way to warmth. Let every roofless soul find a shelter, even if only in another's kindness. And if I must remain here alone, then let my light guide them still. The lamp's flame would flicker, bending forward as if listening. One winter night, as the snow began again, slow, steady, endless, he stepped outside. The cold bit his cheeks, but it no longer frightened him. He stood beside the birch, its trunk scarred with years of carved initials and tied prayers. Above him, the stars glimmered like the reflections of every soul who'd ever passed through. He lifted the lamp, holding it high, and its golden circle spread over the snow, painting the drifts with warmth. Somewhere in the dark, he thought he saw a figure, small, fragile, walking toward the light. Maybe it was real, maybe only memory. But he smiled and whispered into the wind. Come in. It's warm here. The figure did not answer, but the wind softened, carrying back the faintest echo of a woman's voice, gentle, familiar, filled with peace. And for the first time in years, the man whispered his mother's name aloud. Inside, Ash stirred, raising his head, tail thumping weakly against the floor. The man knelt, stroked the dog's fur, and said softly, Rest now, old friend. We've kept the promise. The fire crackled. The lamp glowed steady. Outside, snow fell without hurry, blanketing the earth in a silence that felt like grace. The man closed his eyes and breathed, once, deeply, as though the world had finally exhaled with him. And in that stillness, the house, once broken, once nameless, stood shining like a small, holy thing against the dark, its single light burning bright for anyone still out there searching. Backhand index pointing right if this story warmed your heart. Please subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. Our dream is to reach 1,000 hearts who still believe in faith, kindness, and hope.